Hi, and welcome back to another episode of On Location with Bowen and Mimi. Today, we're so lucky to sit down with Emily Cole. Emily grew up on a farm in central Alberta, and during university went on a life-changing river trip that really inspired her future work as a river guide. That has taken her to some amazing places, including, and I want to say this correctly, is it the Nahanni River?
Nahanni, yeah.
Yeah, from the Nahanni River to Alaska, and I also want to pronounce that
Wrangell,
Alaska, where she guided youth at risk for 50 days in the wilderness, which I'm excited to hear the stories about that adventure.
Lots of stories.
Lots of stories. Emily is currently living in Revelstoke, BC, and is continuing to guide for Elements Adventure Company. Emily, you are also doing your master's in counselling, very busy lady, and you've recently combined your love of outdoor exploration with inner exploration.
Yes.
And you've launched Wilderness Within counselling.
Yeah, Wild Within Coaching.
Wild Within Coaching.
Yeah.
Yeah. So welcome and thanks for sitting down with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's nice to be here.
Yeah. Growing up on a farm in Alberta. Can you tell us about what that was like for you?
Yeah, in my opinion, it was wonderful. I couldn't ask for any better upbringing and the freedom to explore and to try different things and get to work on a lot of different projects. And I think I really view like my parents were like kind of yes people, and somehow our requests tailored into what they had. I think, it was things like, oh, I really like a dresser for my room here. But like, oh, well, why don't we just go see what we have in the antique storage kind of, and we could pull this out and we could touch it up. What color would you like? And it was just always this kind of engaging, we had projects on the go all the time and we were involved in them. Like, I think I really learned a lot about, or really, really valued, life and work being kind of one and the same, because we stepped out our door and there was our work and we were all involved, driving vehicles at the least. And
probably when you were 12?
At least, probably
right,
even,
don't farm
even
kids
younger. As soon as
early.
you could reach the pedals, you had a job to do.
That's right, yeah. What kind of farm was it?
It's a grain farm.
Okay. Yeah, and did you have animals as well, or
just pets?
Okay.
Which was very important, but not a part of our livelihood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The land itself, if you could describe what the farm was like.
Yeah, central Alberta, so it's fairly flat, but our home quarter and a couple of our fields that we owned alongside it as well kind of went right up to what we called our wood lot, which was a creek kind of next to a valley. So the height of land in the area was very close to us. So we had that little bit of variety. And my dad really valued kind of low impact farming, so trying to have practices that really worked with the land and a crop rotation that did as well. So that was always kind of there as well, of, how do we work with this place rather than against it. And then our yard was very established and had, quite a nice little bit of trees and things. So there was a lot of room to just go and roam, and some of that was kind of the rolling grasslands in the back, and other places were the trees, and we had a little bit of a dugout. And, in a lot of ways it's all very, very simple, and, it's not Rogers Pass and, these Mount Bagby of Revelstoke or anything, but it's kind of all you need in a lot of ways, where you can just kind of wander out and look at things and make up games and play with your dog and just have the freedom that you could do anything in that little area of land.
Yeah, no, it sounds idyllic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bowen had a very different upbringing. Bowen's my son. But I'm just remembering about Farley Mowat books. And when you were small, I don't know if you remember Farley Mowat. I think Lost in the Barrens was one that we loved to read together. But yeah, so you have a love of books. I'm just wondering if that also you would, be reading at a young age, and what kind of books you were interested in.
At a young age, I had a very hard time making it past a couple pages of a book. Really liked to be out on the go and played a lot of sports, and my parents very much encouraged it, and I really liked the idea of it. I'm like, okay, this time I got a book for Christmas and I'm going to sit down and read it, and I'd read 2 or 3 pages, be like, yep, that's good for now, and I can go outside or whatever. So I do like, exploring. I think the books I got the most into when I was young there was kind of this series, I don't know what it was, that my mom had found for me that was kind of, different stories of kind of like young girls. Like, again, my memory of it was that they were kind of in an adventure, like it was kind of frontier young girls, or I would have read like Little House on the Prairie as well. I think that's probably what I actually made it the furthest in of series and things. And
and friendships, would you have friends that live close by on other farms, or what was that like?
Yeah, so I think my best friend lived like 6 miles away or something like that. We rode on the bus together, and unfortunately I was at the beginning, so we rode for about an hour in the morning, and they were kind of at the end and rode for an hour in the evening. But that was just part of our life, was everybody rode the bus around the gravel roads and ended up at school and then stayed there because nobody got to go home for lunch, or there were probably 2 town kids in my class that would walk home for lunch or something like that. But those were kind of the good friends. We had that farming town, New Norway, and then Camrose was about 20,000. So we kind of had town not too far away. And probably by the time I was about 12, I was playing on some fairly competitive sports teams.
What was your sport?
I was on a competitive jump rope team, and I ran a lot. Running was kind of my primary, and I played baseball and basketball. Kind of the small town, like you could play on every sports team, and they might really want you to because there might be only 10 girls that want to play basketball that year.
So on like a jump roper.
Yeah.
Okay, I've never met a jump roper before. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, very cool niche sport that, of course, once you're in that world, it's got all of its things. And it kind of had 2 sides. It had the competitive side that was in some ways fairly intense and stressful because you're basically trying to be perfect, because if you stop your rope, which is very easy to do, that was a big dock in points. If you're doing a speed event, you can imagine you're jumping so fast that then it stops, you're losing a lot of points. Yeah. And if it's a trick event, you really cut the flow. So you're kind of trying to be perfect. But we would also do a lot of shows, like halftime shows at basketball games, and we worked with the Heart and Stroke Foundation a lot. So we do these shows, and people just have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
So like I've face planted. I literally like tied my rope around my feet by accident and like fell on the ground and was like, whoops, oopsies. This is gonna take a minute to untie my feet and get up and jump. And everybody's still just like, what? Like, what is going on? Yeah. So there was kind of these 2 sides where we'd have like celebrity status on the performing side that people just had their minds blown, and on the competitive side, you're like, this is incredibly stressful. Otherwise, you can do whatever you want in a show, and it's cool.
Wow. And it is something you could do solo, but you can do it together in a team, right?
Yeah. So we had, solo events that were speed and what we call freestyle. And then we also had a small team. And so you'd do some things where you all had single ropes, but we're jumping the same, or in a relay, but then also double dutch and things like that. And then we had a really big group routine. And on our show part, we had kind of a couple routines that everybody would just know. And so everybody that knows this one, go out and do it. And then the one person that doesn't, they'd come and start doing their freestyle while we got the double dutch ropes. And then you'd go in and just put this flowy show together where the floor is always busy, just doing a variety. We had a few different like show things that we would do too that weren't really involved in competition, but yeah.
Oh, that's unique. Interesting.
Is that something that you still like once in a while, kind of like, doing that today?
Yeah, once in a while. Like it kind of, it got to a point where I wasn't doing it as often. I got into university and I was busy with other things and traveling and guiding, and then it's hard to like stay consistent. So you kind of hit one of those plateaus where you're like, well, the muscle memory is there and I can do the same things, but I just not sticking with it enough to do anything new. And so I'll pull, do it once in a while. It's kind of a party trick almost. But now it really hurts my feet. Like, I don't know why, but my feet will get really, really sore. So it doesn't last very long. And then I remember it for days when I'm like, oh, I can hardly walk. Like my feet muscles aren't used to it or something.
I'm wondering, like, because obviously it seems like you had like a really great childhood growing up on the farm and you really loved it. And I'm wondering if there was any point when you were getting older that you kind of like, you had that kind of pull, like, man, I want to go explore the big city, or I want to go here, or was like, did you always kind of like, no, this is the perfect life? Like,
I think I even from a young age, never been drawn to the city. We'd do trips. It was about an hour to get to Edmonton. And so we would, have a day, we'd do a day trip up to the city and who wants to do what and make this plan and do some shopping. And sometimes, go do an event or something like that. And like, I remember, and eventually we were old enough, you could stay home if you didn't want to come or, whatever. And being like, I just go and spend a bunch of money I don't need to. And whatever, and just really, really loved being on the farm. But I also think I always had this draw to explore. Not that I wanted to move to the city, but that I really wanted to travel. I really wanted to fly on a plane. Like I couldn't wait until the first time. My parents both actually grew up around that area on farms, and they met kind of at the local college. You could only do 2 years at the time, and then had to go up to U of A in Edmonton to finish your degree. But then my dad went out to Ontario for grad school and came home one summer, married my mom, and brought her out. And then, which he had been a cowboy that thought Saskatchewan was too far away at one point, and then was out in Ontario, and they moved up to Yellowknife like in the 80s. And I think, it's like the idea of being up north, especially back then when, the bridge wasn't into Yellowknife. So you were actually locked in for a couple months a year. You could only fly in and out. That there's kind of that real sense of adventure that was kind of a part of our family history of just curiosity kind of leading to opportunities and having the courage to follow those opportunities that always, I always wanted to go up north, and I always wanted to fly on a plane and go explore different areas. So yeah, I think I feel at home more rurally and small town, like even, Revy is nice small town. Sometimes it feels too big, but that access to be able to just walk out your door and explore, but then also that draw to like, go get on a plane and go see somewhere else too.
Oh, I'm just dreaming now of these wild places. Like when you say Northwest Territories, I mean, many people have never had a chance to explore some of the places you've been to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do your parents still have this farm?
Yes. My mom passed away just over a decade ago, and my dad still lives on the farm. He's been renting out his land for, I don't know, it's probably been about 8 years or something like that, and just now started to sell some of the land. None of us kids are wanting to take over the farm. As much as I love it, I don't really want to be a commercial farmer. So, he still lives there. He'll be in a zone of transition at some point, I think, in the near future, or just figuring out, kind of recommitting to that being his place and it looking a bit different. But I think for him, he's got such a tie to that land and the way that he farmed it so well, which is not common. There's a lot of people that are willing to go more for profit, and their crop rotations don't support in the same way that I think it's hard to be there and watch someone else farm your land. And so if you're there, you want to be farming it or having a say, and if you don't have that, you kind of want to go somewhere else where the surroundings don't mean so much to you. So that's still kind of one of my homes as well, is to go back there, and that area still exists, but maybe not for long.
Yeah. Transitions. So you did transition to university.
Yeah, that was quite a big transition in some ways.
Yeah. And the 5-day life-changing, I say life-changing because it really sounds like it sort of, pushed you towards this love of guiding and exploration. Was that organized through the university and this group of friends?
And so kind of how it happened was, in high school, small schools, so, you took your 3 sciences, math and social and English, and then probably phys ed, and that was fine, and, you needed to keep your options open, and then when I got to university, I was like, okay, I did that, I kept my options open, and now, especially that I'm paying for it, I would just want to take what I want to take, and I really like gym class, so how much phys ed can I take? And it was a very small school, so, phys ed there was only about 200 or 300 level phys ed classes. That's it, I got to take like 7 other classes, and, the advisor said, well, there is one other one, you don't need to take it because you're a kinesiology major. The phys ed had 2 different streams, but the only other class is phys ed, and you can take it if you want, but you don't have to, outdoor ed of the phys ed classes. And I was like, well, we went on a high school trip and went paddling for a day, and that was cool. This will probably be cool too, and I want more phys ed, so I'll take that. And so that kind of just was a step into a world that I didn't really know very much about, and part of that intro to outdoor ed class in my first term of university was this 5-day canoe trip that kind of blew my mind in a way. Like I really remember going down the river, all these canoes, and the campsites we had were fairly wild. Like we used them every year, but they weren't established in any way, so they felt very wild, having never camped like that before. And so I remember just at some point floating down this river and being like, you guys, like, do you realize, like, like, we could stop there. We could stop there. We're going to treat water out of the river. We have the food in our barrels. Like, we have everything we need, and we can kind of go wherever we want. This is amazing. You know, and it's cool too when you, that course would have everyone from first to fifth years, you know, people that are really keen or people that end up in their fifth year that have credits they just need to fill. So they're like, oh, I finally, you know, completed all the things of my major, and now I just need 10 more credits. So I'm taking outdoor ed and philosophy and, you know, whatever else. That it was a really, really interesting group of people that got to just kind of come into the group. And now you've got this group of young 20-year-olds that are singing songs around the fire. Like, you know, we're trying to sing songs on the river and we can't remember anything but the chorus. And, you know, and playing these silly games that are like from camp, but we're having such a good time. And I think, especially as time goes on, that becomes more and more rare as people get glued to their phones and also, you know, separated from each other. They're not living in community. They're not getting together to just hang out and play games and have conversations and things like that. So it's a very, very special, like, very special time. That kind of just, then a group of those people were going to go on the next course, and that was more skills-based in the spring. And then that led to the opportunity to volunteer to help lead that intro course. And then that led to a little bit of paid position in the summer, which led to another connection. And the doors just kind of kept opening, and I kept walking through them.
Right.
That's kind of how it all unfolded.
So did some of these other friends who participated in that also become guides?
Yeah, a few. Like, because it was only a stream of a major, you know, it was a fairly small part of the program. So a small school with a small major with a small stream. So there was kind of, after a year or two, there was about 3 of us that kind of felt like the 3 musketeers that just said yes to everything. You know, so we worked a lot together. I think they were a year ahead of me, so sometimes we didn't end up on the same trips all the time, but we bought canoes at the same time, so we could go, you know, day trip to Canmore and paddle and things like that. And then all of us ended up working up on the Nahanni at some point. And I think what I keep coming back to is, like, I really, really love guiding, like, more than I love personal trips or getting to do my own thing. And, you know, and an adventure like that, it's really hard to find other people that have the time and the desire to, like, yes, for the next 6 years, I'd like to dedicate all my free time and resources to paddling waterways. That, I think I love being out there with people and getting to kind of, like, take them, you know, the things that seem scary, we can kind of work through it and, like, you know, release a lot of that fear and see that we can work with the elements and manage a lot of risk. And the people that don't have time, or, you know, they've got other responsibilities, they don't have time to do the prep, like, I can do that and I can bring us out there. And that's kind of what I love the most. I keep coming back to how much I really love taking other people out there. And
right. Maybe at this time then you could tell us a little bit about this time in Alaska, because that is quite interesting.
Yeah, so I worked for a company called Alaska Crossings, and we took at-risk youth is kind of the most general term. So kids with some level of behavioral challenge. They had to have some type of diagnosis, and they had to voluntarily come and be between 12 and 18 and residents of Alaska. And that was kind of the very basic of who we took out. And we were based out of Wrangell, which is down on the Panhandle, southeast Alaska, in the rainforest on an island. And we ran, the model changed a couple times, but either 48-day or 63-day trips, mostly ocean canoeing. We'd use the Lower Stikine River is there sometimes. So if that fit, we would use that. And we'd do a little bit of hiking, but mostly we're on a long paddling expedition. And the kids would all fly into town, and we'd kind of do our intake process and get them changed over into the gear they needed. And we would go out, and if everything was going well, we stayed out. You know, if somebody needed to come in and go to the doctor, or even, you know, if they were in a remote village and that didn't have a dentist, and we could get them into the dentist while they were there, you know, things like that, we could make them work. But mostly we stayed out there, and we saw a jet boat every 1 to 2 weeks that brought us food and whatever else we needed. We needed to write paperwork and stuff for our documentation, so it'd bring us batteries and...
Right, I was curious about that
like
aspect. When you're guiding, you do have a team of people who are supporting you. And so as a guide, what are your responsibilities?
Yeah, we have, like, a huge amount of responsibility, and a lot of them that we maybe don't have to act on, you know? It's like, if I'm out there guiding and someone has a major medical, like, I'm responsible. the closest thing they have to a doctor. And some of that responsibility is using my first aid training, and it's also knowing how and when to call for an evac, and be able to evacuate that person into higher medical care. You know, so it's their health and safety, wellness, like the day-to-day wellness too, of helping people. You know, anybody need a layer break? Are you sure you don't need a layer break? Like really working with people to take care of themselves and stay hydrated. We're in charge of the cooking. We might not do all of it, but we're in charge of making sure it happens well.
Okay.
And the paddling safety, setting up tarps. Like people kind of, you know, ideally are able to mostly take care of themselves, set up their own tent, manage their own layers.
Yeah, I was thinking
like
with these kids, especially, you'd think that would be a part of including them in that.
Yeah, and yeah, so kind of back to Alaska more so, we really work to, you know, empower the youth we were working with. So on that program, everybody had their own individual tarp. So in the first couple days, we did a lot of teaching on the basics, and then your first, say, 10-day expedition was really taking the time it took to teach the skills. So go over the knots again, and, you know, go around and work with them to, hey, I just noticed this corner of your tarp is a little bit saggy. Like if we pull it out to this angle, it'll be tighter and the rain will come off of it, and helping them to learn those skills so then they could set up their own tarp. And then they're like, look, I made my own tarp this time. And oh, I really like it when it's, you know, it's got a little root so I don't roll out from under. And then they could kind of really own their zone, and, you know, they start to feel pretty proud about it, and really see, you know, these are often kids that it's the kid that has a tough time sitting in the classroom. So they're kind of getting these messages, they're not good enough and they're not smart enough, and they start to feel like they can't do anything, and they go home and they can't do anything right, and maybe even in their friend group, and then they're kind of like, hey, I did something. And you're like, dude, you did something. Like you did it, and you did it really great, and looking for those places where you can celebrate. So when I think about that program, at least the way I tried to approach it, you know, at first we're teaching a bunch, and then we're kind of teaching experientially. So we're out on an expedition, but we're taking the time to correct strokes so that people can paddle and not be super tired, and work with them to set up their tarps and go around and do chores. We need to collect firewood and water and cook dinner and tie up the boats, and all these responsibilities that we could really involve the kids in. And then to kind of give them more and more opportunity, like as a reward rather than a punishment. Like, hey man, like you guys are really doing great. Like, do you want to cook dinner tonight and I'll help you? Like I'll be your sous chef rather than you be mine. They're like, okay. And it's like, sweet, like getting to cook dinner is the reward for doing well, like winning for everyone. So I tried to work towards where it'd be maybe your last expedition where you're like, okay, you're each in charge for a day. Like we had this thing we called voice of the day or leader of the day. So one of the kids would have a bit more responsibility. And maybe at first that just started with, before meals, we would do 30 seconds of silence. If you were religious, you wanted to pray or not, or just sit in silence, it was just a time where we could kind of like honor the day. So maybe that was the first responsibility. All you have to do is you say, everyone, please, prepare yourself for 30 seconds of silence. And when you think 30 seconds has about passed, you just say thank you, and then we go and eat. Maybe that's all the responsibility to start with. Gradually increasing it towards the end where we'd say, okay, you're going to be in charge. So you can come down with us guides in the morning, and if you want, you can have a cup of coffee with us. Or hot chocolate, it's your choice. You get to have a hot drink. And then we need to go over the route, and we need to pick paddling partners, and we need to look at the chore rotation. And, you know, maybe there's a couple other things we need to do in the day, and to try and get the kids to we usually did group in the evening, some kind of, it varied a lot. Sometimes it was therapeutic, or it was a story and we'd discuss it, or it was a team building activity, and we'd try and work them up to leading group. And every kid's different. So one kid might be like, yep, I got it, and they go for it. And the other kid is like, can barely talk in front of people. So maybe their leadership is they pass the paper to me and I read it for them. And then I pass them back, and maybe all they ever say is thank you at the end, and they led group. So kind of working it up to like, yeah, you guys led this expedition. Of course, we're doing a ton in the background, and we're ultimately in charge, and we're communicating with the office. We're writing a bunch of paperwork, but really trying to give them this opportunity to really own their experience and feel powerful and take on responsibility, and see that they can do things, and that they can go back home afterwards and find places where they can have mentorship and they can have good relationships and they can help out at home and they can work with their parents rather than against them maybe, and their siblings and their community members. So
some of the same values as the Vernon Community School, it sounds like. Yeah. Taking it up. Yeah.
Nice.
How long did you do that for?
Yeah, I was there for 5 years, and in a typical year, like we had staff training for the whole month of March, so I'd be up there for March, and then I usually worked, maybe a program starting in the spring for, if it was when we were doing the 63-day model, you worked like half of it, so you say you worked about a month, and if we were doing the 50-day model, you could work the whole thing, which was really magical to bring kids start to finish. So I would typically work, maybe like a shift, 30 to 50 days in the spring, and maybe a little bit of something. Sometimes I bounced around to just kind of infield support or infield training in the summer, especially as I kind of got up in experience. You could kind of go in and do a bit of coaching to kind of help the guide team, because it was a wildly challenging job. And then I usually worked a program like November, December, kind of right before Christmas, and I'd have usually a good time to chunk off like September, October, and maybe go do a little bit of river stuff in the summer. But you kind of worked weeks or months on, and then you had weeks or months off. So there was room to go and do personal trips or go catch up with your family members and things like that.
Did you have a question?
Well, just it's got to be really like rewarding experience to be able to kind of do that and give back, and you're still doing something you love, but you're helping these these kids who might not have had that opportunity. And was there ever any kind of like drama on those trips? I mean, I imagine there must have been. And how did you kind of how would you handle that aspect of it?
Yeah, you could kind of say like drama or something of that nature was our business. We had very, very high risk management policies, because we took 9 kids that have been kicked out of school and we put them all together. The point is that they can work out their patterns. So we've, sometimes had kids fighting and running away. That was kind of like the extreme part of it, or threatening or whatever. But on a daily basis, you could expect, somebody's going to kind of mouth off at somebody else, and maybe even somebody refuses and we don't leave the beach that day, or somebody refuses to paddle, or, whatever, especially kind of in the beginning to middle, where the beginning was a lot of kind of, it felt like you're really working uphill to kind of get things going. And of course, nobody knows each other, nobody trusts each other. And that's actually a really sacred thing, to trust each other, that we kind of take for granted until it's really been hurt.
And that takes time.
It takes time. So once we kind of got to the middle, as a head guide there, I'd kind of, I'd make my plan. Here's our route and our mileage, and here's where I think we'll stop for lunch, and here's the paddling partners and the chore rotation, and what I think we'll do for group tonight, and all this could change. And then I'd kind of go through and look at where I thought it might go off the rails. Like, oh, these 2 guys maybe don't really like paddling together, but we're specifically working with them about working together, so that might not go so well. And if that really can't go well, maybe we could switch it here. And well, this kid just really hates firewood duty, and he's on firewood duty, so we'll see what happens there. And this kid got a tough letter from home yesterday, and so you kind of okay, kind of got that in the back of my mind of here's where I think it'll go off, and I've kind of got some contingency plans, and yet somehow we end up over in left field. You're like, wow, I really didn't see that one coming. So we had a lot. And I think, your strategy for working with something like that, where it's like we have such a human tendency that we want to do well, we maybe even want to be perfect, and now you're working in a job where there's no chance. It's not going to be perfect, and you're working to be able to accept that. So then kind of on the flip side, you're kind of like, okay, well, great. Well, now I get to totally let go of things being perfect, and I get to just work with what is. And your strategy for that. And sometimes it was hard on you. You just really felt like you needed a win, or there's friction in the guide team, which can totally happen. And the weather's really tough, or you're working through something personally, or you get bad news from home, or something that you can't really call in sick, because there's you don't get to stay home. But we did have a team that would support us as best they could. But I think the best strategy that I had at one point, where I was going through probably the start of some burnout, where things were starting to get a bit harder, and we were a little bit short-staffed too, and we had kind of a tough program. But somewhere I had gotten the mantra. I'm sure I had kind of gotten these questions or this mantra from someone else or the support of someone else. But I had a couple questions I would reflect on every day. And one was, what went well today and why? Which is really, really cool. Like, your life's in chaos and you look for something that went well, but then you also ask why. And you can usually see something that you did. So even if you think you screwed everything up, you can see something that went well and somehow that you contributed to it that can give you a bit of forward momentum. And the other one was, what can I learn from today? Which it's like, that turns everything into a rich experience, you know? And I remember a really great day where we were really struggling. Like, it was really hard for us to get kind of this forward momentum with the group. And that looked like a lot of refusals. And we had some kids that were running away. And it was hard for us as staff that came in halfway through to get buy-in with the group. So we had a day where it was kind of building up to this. And one kid just refused. And I had the rest of the group, and and we took down our tarps and we loaded the boats, and then we were still waiting. So we did our journal exercise, and then we had lunch. And, at some point, it's still just, the refusal was still in process. And so at some point, it makes time to make the decision to unload the boats and set camp back up. And, and you can kind of work with these dynamics to the group's frustrated, hear their frustrations and figure out, hey, we're all a team, so us being mad at that guy over there isn't actually helping us move forward. So what do we need to be able to welcome that guy back in the group? And it just gave us a lot of opportunity to address what had been going on for a long time, of the tensions in the group and the patterns that were coming out. And people are only doing what they know to do in conflict. So we ended up, we're still on the beach, and you could look at that, like, today on the basic level was a failure. Like, I didn't even move forward. We didn't even get our group off the beach. But when you look deeper than that and you say, what can I learn from this? What went well and why? You're like, today was incredibly rich, and it was actually a pivot point in our trip where we were able to have a big enough blow up that it brought patterns to light that we really needed to address. And then we could really move forward in a way that we had never been able to before. Yeah,
the mess.
There's one example.
Yes,
of
no, that's
hundreds
beautiful.
of days of
It's usually in the mess, right, where a lot
Yes.
of the best gifts come. I just would love to hear a little bit about how you developed your combining your love for the outdoors with, I call it inner exploration.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how did that come
I'm trying to
together?
think. Like, I've kind of had this business brewing in the background for probably about 5 years now, when I first started coaching and developed my website. And, you try and pick a name for a thing you're just starting, and you just don't know if it's the right thing, but you're kind of like, I just need to check this box so I can move on to the next part and start doing it more. And Wild Within Coaching came up somehow, and I kept kind of orienting back to like I love that self-exploration, and I love being out on trips, whether they're specifically wilderness therapy or they're personal trips or just a guided river trip. But people just keep coming up with these cool epiphanies of like, oh, this is what's going on, or this is this pattern, or this is what I want to do with my life. And it's always felt like it's not about the trip. Like, it's about where we journey within ourselves on the trip. And yeah, so I kind of come back to like, wow, the biggest adventure, like the greatest adventure of our lives is actually journeying through the wild within more than the wilderness outside. And wilderness therapy was a huge example of that, with, kids saying like, wow, I've needed to cry and I just couldn't until I was here, in that space that really invites people into a different area of themselves. And yeah, trying to figure out, it's like, well, sometimes it makes sense to offer people services from the comfort of our own home, but really wanting to expand on that area. And it's so great working with Charles at Elements, that he really supports it as well, to be able to combine the paddling.
Elements Adventure Company is operating out of Lumbee, and you are in partnership.
Yeah, and so I work for Elements as an employee, and then somehow, however we want to call it, we're partnering my vision for that and Charles' support with that to develop paddling retreats. And he already had one. He already had a couples retreat that they were doing, and so he's really given me the opportunity to do what I want to do, which is to to take people on a journey really inside themselves by going outside into the wilderness. And yeah, I really think that's an environment that can be a really, really fantastic container for the self-work that we might not even know that we need to do, but we feel some level of desire to go and explore that and see what happens.
It's paddling with a purpose. Yeah. Amazing. You've taken us on a great journey today, and I really appreciate all the adventures and your sharing of them. And I don't know, one day maybe we need to sign up.
Yeah, come.
Mother and son.
Fun.
I need a good cry.
Yeah.
Emily, you can make me cry out by a tree or on a river.
Yeah. Cry and then laugh afterwards. And then cycle
Exactly.
repeat.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for spending time with us. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you so much for your
Yeah.
time and for having me. It's been really lovely.
Thanks. And we'll be seeing everyone another time on Location with Bone and Mimi.